Welcome to lesson 3.2, comparing and ordering fractions and decimals. So in the last lesson, you learned how to translate between fractions and decimals and then decimals to fractions. And then this lesson, we're going to use benchmarks, place value, and equivalent fractions to compare and order fractions and decimals. So thinking about them in terms of greatest to least or least to greatest, and how do we represent that using benchmarks. So the first kind of most common question is what is a benchmark and what does that even mean? So a benchmark is more or less just thinking about ordering numbers kind of like on a number line. So I'm just going to start by drawing a number line here. And benchmarks are basically just the numbers on the number line that indicate where that place would fall. So if this is my benchmark for 0, this might be my benchmark for 1/2. Maybe this would be my benchmark for 1. And keep in mind, it has to be logical. If this is my benchmark for 1/2, we know it has to fall halfway between 0 and 1. So kind of keep going with this pattern, and because you have to stay consistent. If this is 0, 1/2, 1, it looks like our benchmarks are going up by 1/2. So this would be 1 1/2. And if I was to extend this and keep going, what would be my next benchmark? We have 0, 1/2, 1, 1 1/2. So my next benchmark would be 2. And these are just indicators of when we're given a series of fractions and decimals. These just help us place where those fractions and decimals would go on a number line. And just continuing with the idea of benchmarks for a moment on this slide, I just wanted to make note that benchmarks can be written in the form of a fraction or in the form of a decimal, or it could be both in some situations, because we know that a fraction can be equivalent to a decimal and they mean the same thing, and it's just a number represented in a different way. And what I mean by that, so in my last example, and I'll just kind of reiterate that one, I was going up by halves in my benchmark. So I started with 0, and then I went up to 1/2, and then I went to 1 1/2, and then I went to 2. Nope, sorry, I missed. Let me erase this here. I did not do that correctly. So we started at 0, 1/2. This would be 1 1/2, and this would be 2. So our benchmarks are going up by 1/2. So I would use a number line in benchmarks with fractions if the question was asking me to order fractions. So if I had a fraction of 5/8 and 11/12 and it said where might these fall on this number line, I would use benchmarks with fractions because I'm dealing with fractions. And just to solve this, if I look at 5/8 and I say, okay, where would that fall on this number line of sorts, or with these benchmarks, where does this fall? So I look at 5/8 and I know that 4/8 is a half because 4 out of 8 is 1/2. So I know that 5/8 is pretty close to a half, but I know that it's a little bit bigger. So that being said, I know my 5/8 would not fall in this area because this is less than 1/2. This is the area from 0 to 1/2. I know that 5/8 is not greater than 1, but I know that it's bigger than 1/2, so I know it's going to fall in this area. And because it's just slightly bigger than 1/2, my assumption will be that it's going to fall pretty close to the 1/2 mark. So that's where I would place my 5/8 using these benchmarks. Looking at our second example, 11/12. When I look at that number, I know that 6/12 is 1/2. So if I had 6/12, I know it would fall kind of in this area. And I know that if I had 12/12, that would give me 1 whole or 1. So I know that 11/12, because it's in between those two numbers, again, is going to fall in this area. But is 11/12 closer to 1/2 or closer to 1? And I'm going to say it's closer to 1 because 11/12, if I was to add only 1 more 12th, I would have a whole. So I know that 11/12 is pretty close to 1 whole. So I would probably place that about here. using my benchmarks. So when you have questions dealing with fractions, you would use benchmarks that have fractions. And then on the same note, if you had numbers with decimals, you would use benchmarks using decimals. So I'm just going to kind of choose the same numbers, but I'm going to write them in decimal form. So I know that 1/2 is a decimal is 0.5. I know that 1 is a decimal is 1.0. 1 and 1/2 is 1.5. 2.0. So if I had numbers, for example, let's do a couple here. If I had 0.75 and let's say, oh, let me erase that. So if I had 0.75 and 1.75, and I said, where would these fall using the benchmarks? Because I see that they're numbers with a decimal, I would use my benchmarks with a decimal. So again, just looking at these numbers, 1.75. I know that in this case, I can kind of just look at the number, and we like to look at this number right after the decimal in the tenths place. So I see a 7 here, and I know I have no holes, but I have 7/10. And so I look here, I have 5/10, but I know that my 7 is a little bit bigger than that, and then at this point we're at 1 whole, so I'm not quite there. So I know that my 0.75 will fall somewhere in between there, so 0.75. And then if I look at my 1.75, I do have a 1 in this units place, and then I have a 7 in the tenths place. So I know that my number is going to be greater than 1.0. I know that my number will be greater than 1.5, because this 7 is greater than this 5, but I'm not quite at this 2.0 area yet, so I know that my 1.75 is going to fall in this area. So it's just a reminder that if you are ordering and pairing fractions, you're going to use benchmarks with fractions, and if you're ordering numbers with decimals, you're going to use benchmarks with decimals.